My name is Tracy Galloway, and I'm a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And I'm part of this seminar series looking at how community resilience is impacted by the way people and services and goods move to and from communities. And so we're really interested in an intersection of theoretical approaches to that issue. And so we're delighted to be joined today by Dr. Blake Poland, who's my colleague at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health. Blake, I hope I'm looking at a recent bio sketch, so if I'm not, please correct me, but it lists you as co-director of the World Health Organization Collaborating Center in Health Promotion, the co-lead of the Dalla Lana School's Healthier Cities and Communities Hub, and I know you as the director of the Collaborative Specialization in Community Development here at the University of Toronto. And we're really delighted to have you contribute to our seminar series. And I'll let you continue to describe your history and your work. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Tracy. This is really a team effort. So for some reason, this isn't starting on the opening slide, but never hurts to start with our key takeaways, I suppose. Delighted to be here. It really is a group effort. And I want to introduce our other presenters today because I'm really excited by what we've pulled together today. So in addition to myself, we have Anne Gloger, who's the principal of the Center for Connected Communities. Anne, you can wave, or we'll see you in a minute. But we also have two voices of community grassroots leaders, and I'm really excited to bring them into this space. Ismail, Afrah, and Shakhlo, Sharipova, who are both with the Local Champions Network, which is a network of local grassroots leaders. Ismail's from Regent Park and is very active there, as you'll hear as this unfolds. And Shakhlo is in Thorncliffe Park, and almost too many initiatives that they have their fingers in to list them all here, but you'll hear about some of them as our presentation unfolds. And thank you for the invitation to contribute here. This is a lovely opportunity to share some work in progress and share our vision of a connected community approach to community resilience work. So you've probably debated this at length, so I won't stay too long on this, but just wanted to check, first of all, are you seeing presenter view or the full slide without the notes?
Full slide without the notes?
Okay, perfect. Okay. So there are many different definitions of resilience, but the one that works well for us is one that understands this as a function of persons, communities, and systems to not only withstand shocks and stress without collapse, or in other words, to bounce back from adversity, but also to the ability to accept and embrace change and bounce forward into new ways of doing things. And resilient community is one that takes intentional action together collectively to enhance capacity of citizens and institutions to respond to and influence the course of social and economic change. And that's from Michelle Calusi on the West Coast. What we found, and a number of us have been in this space doing this work for a while now, in my case about a decade, is that the role of community in disaster response and responding to crises is now well recognized, although unevenly within the literature, alongside an appreciation that is growing that marginalized communities are often the hardest hit in these crises, and that official formal system response is often slower than civil society itself mobilizes during crisis, but that when it arrives, it often runs roughshod over these informal efforts. So rather than being aligned and working with local expertise and networks and community resources, it tends to just kind of bulldoze over it all and impose its own solutions from the top down. So there have been more and more calls in the literature for better collaboration and integration between community and formal response systems, but still fairly little, not much guidance on exactly how to do this. So there's a recognition, in fact, that a community resilience approach to emergency preparedness and disaster response needs to put a lot more emphasis on collaboration and engagement in leveraging the assets of both government and formal systems and communities. And this takes a number of forms, but what we see often in resilience planning of various kinds is a focus on the bottom piece there, the hard infrastructure, the built capital, with much less emphasis on the human, natural, and social capital in communities. And so we're seeing the need to sort of rebalance resilience efforts to include what's sometimes referred to as the soft infrastructure and not just the hard infrastructure. And to move from just recovery and adaptation or bouncing back from adversity to more transformative work and looking at how do we bounce forward. Because if all we're doing is bouncing back, then the normal that's implied in the bouncing back is deeply dysfunctional, both from a sustainability point of view and from a social and equity point of view. So we need to really conjoin these efforts to bounce back from adversity, but also use crisis as an opportunity to rethink some of the fundamentals for a whole variety of reasons, but chief among them, the fact that, the status quo is deeply problematic and is creating all kinds of threats to planetary health and health equity. And on that equity front, we see that in fact our cities, and Toronto is leading the charge in this, according to some of the data, are becoming more and more unequal. And if you see the numbers on the right, the top 20% of households have seen an almost 40% increase in income from 1980, whereas the bottom 20% have seen a very real decline. And so this rising equity is really a key element of and needs to be central in any building of resilience.
So
And
this needing to center equity in our resilience strategies was really embraced in the development of Toronto's first resilience strategy that was developed in 2018. And the process for developing the resilience strategy started with the idea of really co-developing it with grassroots leaders in the local champion network who were on the ground and really understanding what resilience and equity meant. Next slide. The result of the deep consultation and co-creation of tools and approaches to understanding community and resilience led the resilience strategy to adopt 3 specific aspects of community-based resilience: civic engagement, equity, and communities and neighborhoods. This is half of the entirety of the resilience strategy, which is quite groundbreaking, as many cities adopted resilience as a physical infrastructure project only. So the commitment to equity very much was informed by local grassroots groups. Next slide. When we think about equity and we think about resilience, one of the things that really came forward in the creation of the resilience strategy is that it shouldn't be an isolated project. Resilience is not isolated from the other strategies that are being adopted by the city. We've got 4 of them identified here, but the idea that community-centered resilience is cross-cutting. So whether you're looking at anti-Black racism, issues of poverty, ways to protect seniors, they're not isolated issues, and if we don't work on them in an interconnected way centered on community, we are never seeing the whole picture of what a resilient community needs to look like. Next. So this is an example of how community-centered resilience can look in relation to city strategies. So on the right are the city strategies. On the left are, or sorry, the wrong way around, the left of the community's city strategies. On the right are the actions that are taking place on the ground. And what we often find in community development literature is a focus on one or the other. And this, that Blake alluded to earlier, is the idea that with intentionality and with the appropriate framework and structures, it is possible that they are mutually reinforcing. They are not duplicating each other's work. There is definitely a place for a formal response, especially to a crisis like we're facing right now in terms of a pandemic. But the idea that it is the only response and that grassroots groups and neighborhood players are recipients of services rather than active players in creating solutions to the crises that are arising has been a huge gap in a lot of the crisis management processes that we've seen to date.
And
Next
can you
slide.
just say something very quickly about how this was generated? Like
I certainly
what
can.
led to this being created?
So what out of the Toronto resilience strategy, where we talked about it not being an isolated function, what we did was we brought together 100 different city staff across 10 divisions who spent a day together with a facilitator facilitating a theory of change process. The idea of understanding what it is that the city would need to do, leveraging what values and principles in order to achieve what results. The idea that we're leveraging city systems so that community actors can act more effectively and efficiently, not that we are doing to community, but finding out what it is that community needs in order to effectively respond. These 100 people came together, and over the course, it actually ended up being 2 days with a smaller working group, devised this as the template for moving forward.
Thank you. And I think that's a perfect segue into Shakhlo's work in Thorncliffe Park. So Shakhlo, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so here comes our work on the ground level. I'm going to talk about Ramadan free meal project, which we have launched from April 15 till May 22. So you can imagine, April 15 is still beginning of the pandemic, right? Everything is closed except a few grocery stores, personal support workers not coming to seniors' home to help them. There are big lines in this grocery stores. There is a shortage of personal protective equipment. There is shortage of food, and food banks all closed. And while city was like developing like food initiative across Toronto, so we were getting messages from our residents. By that time, I had a WhatsApp group in our community. It calls community support group, and we had around maybe 70 families in that group. So they just started, we were checking every day on each other, how are you doing, how is everyone is coping, just to make sure that mental well-being our residents is okay. So, and they just started messaging, I am looking for someone who can come to my mom's home and cook for her. I live like far from her. Anyone in Thorncliffe can help her. Another one was messaging, I have a cousin who is international student. He's in basement and doesn't have access to a kitchen. Anyone, if anyone have leftover foods, please send them, and giving addresses. And this is how we started to realize how like some people need in food like crucially. And Ramadan month was coming, and I said, well, this is the right way to start, because during Ramadan, usually lots of people would like to donate, and it was easy. I was assuming it would be easy to get like donation, and I was right. So I made a call, like again in our groups, that I'm going to feed for like 100 people. If anyone wants to be with me, please join me. And maybe right away, I got maybe 12 messages from 12 people saying, I am with you. And in 2 days, we set up Zoom meeting. We made a plan. We assessed our skills, who is going to do budgeting, who is going to design flyer, who will be delivery volunteers, and who will be cooking for them, who will be making like purchases, like those containers, etc. We started also reading all those officials' documents to make sure that all safety guidelines followed. And one of our volunteers, she's a healthcare worker. I said to her, can you please develop guidelines for our volunteers, so to ensure our recipients that we are safe to come and deliver food, so they trust us. So we developed those kind of documents. And just in 1 week, we just started our work. And during 1 week, I raised maybe like almost $3,000, and it was from individuals. We didn't apply to any organization, any agency. So it was very quick, and like it went so smooth and fast. Thank you. Can you, yes, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So while we were distributing food, although we said our volunteers, you just put food in front of the door, step back in 2 meters, make sure people get food, and then you can go. People didn't want to like let our volunteers to go fast, you know, they wanted to talk, and they were like, hey, how are you doing? What organization are you? Are you guys helping with masks? Are you guys helping with hand sanitizers? And one family, she had a newborn. She said, can you help me with diapers, with food, with baby food? So this all needs, right away, I was posted in my social media groups, in WhatsApp groups, and asking people for help, that people asking for PPE, people asking for diapers, for baby food. And at the same time, I was a part of sewing project in Michael Garron Hospital. I was sewing masks. As you remember, Michael Garron Hospital and all other hospitals, they made a challenge to the like local residents, please sew masks and donate to us. So I was part of that project too. So I made a call about masks, and they said, it's not a problem. And they delivered us 500 masks, which was put in the food delivery packages for the next delivery. So we delivered it. And also we supported some seniors with grocery stuff. Some of them asked for fruit, some of them asked for free vegetable, like for fresh vegetables. We did it. And we got a call from women's shelters. They said, you know, we need something like for our women, and like there is like lack of accessibility to the kitchen. If you bring more food, especially frozen one, it would be good, so they can at least have 1 week like food for them. So we did that one too. And also you see this cake, we care. We baked this cake, especially for those women. There were like 37 women with children. And I also made a call for our neighbors to give some maybe toys. And we also delivered some toys with the food. So they were very happy. So this is how we realized on an ongoing basis what people need, and like try to fulfill those needs too while delivering food to them. Thank you. Next slide. And yes, that was interesting. Our project also was interesting from another side. Is, you know, people who were getting food from us, they started donating. They said, one of seniors, when we delivered to food for him, it was like third or fourth time, he just gave $20 to our volunteer and said, can you please spend it so more people will get benefit from this food initiatives? And our volunteer, she just broke in tears, and it was so touching, because she knew that senior was lonely and was in need, but still he offered help, this $20. And I even made a post in Facebook and in Twitter, and it got so much emotional support. This what senior had did. Another stuff also, one lady, she just gave us like a pack of milk. She said, can you get it to other family maybe who have like children and they need it. At the same time, nonprofits around in our area and agencies, they started offering their help too. For example, our local schools, they called me and say, oh, we heard you are doing this free meal project. We have cheesy snacks for kids. Can you take it and give it to families? We have left it from school year. I said, yes, of course. And they delivered us 600 packages of cheese snacks. So we also added them too to our families. I mean, we started getting lots of donations from people around, and even catering services and restaurants, if you remember, were closed too. But they called us, you know, we are going to help you and we want to deliver food to you. So you just give to those people in it. So this project actually got like bigger and bigger. So by our last time food distribution launched maybe 500 recipients. So because we had that capacity to do, so we were happy to do so. Yes, thank you. Yeah, next slide, please.
I'm sorry, Shakhlo, I was supposed to reformat this and it somehow didn't get done. My apologies.
So one of those takeaways. Of course, we got several thank you notes from our recipients. For instance, as you see, like international students, they say like, you made our lives easier. Like they were also, I think they didn't have access to the kitchen. These students were living in a basement. So they were very happy with our initiative. And even when we finished, all people were calling me and saying, are you going to continue? We need more food. So I was just transferring this list of recipients to other agencies who launched this campaign. So by finishing our project during 1 month, people still needed food. So after we finished, I saw many organizations launch this project and they just connected with us and we provided them with a list of recipients. So overall, we had 34 volunteers involved. And I'm happy to, and I'm proud to say that all those volunteers, after our project finished, they all started own food initiatives. You know, they were so inspired. I heard that someone started just delivering only Fridays, just by themselves, also just by donations made by people. Totally, we had 500 recipients. As I said, we delivered almost 1,600 meals. And yes, we got new connections. I mean, people just got new friends. Maybe like after this initiative, I got almost 600 new connections in my phone. So you can imagine how much contacts I have right now because of just these food initiatives. And seniors especially, they were very thankful, seniors. So by the end, during this project, while we were conducting this project, every week I was sending newsletters to Twitter, Facebook, and to our MPs, just to let them know what we are going to do, what we are organizing, what we are going to do, and just to let them know the needs of our community. And on the last newsletter, we post this statement which says, in a critical situation such as lockdown during COVID-19, local residents and community leaders can come together to identify community needs and respond promptly. Local nonprofits and governmental structures may fully rely and offer financial support for their mission. Sense of collectivism and one community is one family certainly sharpens during critical situation and makes people becoming closer to each other and sensitive for the needs of each other. And government should trust more to community leaders and provide more support for community well-being and emotional and psychological stability. As I said, all the donations were made by individuals. Although I was messaging to nonprofits and agencies, they said, we don't have like secured funding to fund your project. So maximum they did, they just donated masks or hand sanitizers, gloves, provided gloves for our volunteers, but no financial support. This statement just was to encourage government in future to give more capacity and more resources for local residents to be able to do more projects in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakhlo. Such important and inspiring work. So glad you could share that today. Anne, over to you.
So the critical work that Shakhlo is doing in her community, the very important city mobilization, and then the multiple organizations that are in place to support various different needs within a community. Right now, those three levels operate completely separately. And within each level, there are, particularly at the organizational and the institutional level, different needs, different subject matter experts operate in silos. And so to Blake's earlier point, that there is very little guidance onto how do you unite all these things to create a truly resilient community. For the past 20 years, we've been pioneering an approach in East Scarborough called the Connected Community Approach, which does just that. Next slide. So the idea is that community resilience really hinges on the place-based coordination, communication, and support of grassroots groups and networks like Shakhlo's. Next slide. So the connected community approach is not a hard and fast set of rules or steps on how you achieve this, but it is a set of principles and practical tools that will allow communities to effectively and nimbly address not just major shocks, but also ongoing stressors. It's not just about service coordination. It is really about understanding what aspirations and aptitudes, mandates, and resources are in a community and can be brought to a community in order to create a collective and coordinated approach to the complexity of issues that a community is faced with. Next slide, please. So the connected community approach posits that there are 10 keys to unlocking the potential of a connected community. It's predicated on the idea of community coordination. So an organization or a community group that acts as what we call a community backbone organization, also termed an intermediary or an integrator. But the community backbone organization is not a service delivery organization. Its purpose, its sole purpose, is to elevate the work of people within the community and connect it in ways so that everybody's success is amplified. Next slide. There are 10 keys that work well together, and they all focus on the prioritizing equity and power sharing. We have this unfortunate approach to community-based problems where the community is seen as a community of needs and that professionals need to respond to and fix. The connected community approach kind of turns that idea on its head and says that there's power in the community and professionals' role is to support that power in ways that communities can identify their own priorities and leverage resources and institutional power in order to maximize the capacity of the community to help itself and work with systems players so that the system is supporting the community and the community is supporting the system. Next slide, please. So in terms of a resilient strategy, each community has its own context, and I know we've heard a lot about this during COVID. That you know we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. We're in different boats, and each community looks different. And it's so important for any strategy to be deeply rooted in an understanding of that community's specific context, and then mobilizing coordination, communication, and leveraging of resources in order to respond to the specifics of that community. And that the leveraging is the grassroots response, the social services response, the city and emergency response, and then the nuanced different organizations that may come in and be able to provide services, supports, or networking in ways that are unique to that community. Next slide, please.
So you can imagine that what Anna's just described would be music to my ears as a longtime community development person, and really seeing this gap in the resilience literature and in resilience-based work. We were so excited to discover the Center for Connected Communities and to work with them on these series of projects. And so I'm just going to describe one of those briefly, that we have been given funding from the School of Cities and the COVID Action Initiative to do a project looking at connected communities in a time of physical distancing, and the kinds of community-led responses during the pandemic that Shakhlo has described and that Ismail will share with us shortly. And so we have this team of university researchers and C3 folks and Sheila Murray from Crew, and all around this research question of what community building efforts were in place prior to COVID-19 that are enabling communities to respond effectively. So all to this notion that some kind of hub or center, like what the role that Storefront played in East Scarborough, what does that enable as residents come together during the pandemic to try and respond? And all built around a series of shared principles that talk about the need to see community resilience as a community development process with many of the features that Anne has described, to emphasize that grassroots strategies and formalized professional strategies are both required elements of community resilience building, and that equity really needs to be at the core. And so I've been working with C3, and this has really been such a lovely community university partnership, but we're working with C3 to do a series of interviews and sense-making workshops and so on in 6 racialized and low-income neighborhoods in Toronto, represented around the outside of these graphics here, to pull together from the gray literature neighborhood profiles. We've done 50 interviews with grassroots leaders, people like Shakhlo and Ismail, who are active in the community. We have some sense-making workshops with neighborhood leaders coming up, and C3, with input from the research, is developing a series of podcast episodes as part of the Signal Boost podcast series. This is available on Spotify and through the C3 website. And so that's part of what we've been doing in the last couple of months. And this repeats a little bit of the information on an earlier slide in terms of our research question and shared principles. But what we wanted to illustrate here is the ways in which community, university, and residents are working together to co-produce knowledge about a connected community approach to community resilience and community-centered resilience work. And this is part of a larger program that implicates both research and community work with C3 and with the City of Toronto. So we have a suite of projects that are either already funded or under review on the right-hand side, including a SSHRC proposal to develop a racial justice frame for resilience work, which has been largely absent in the literature up until now. That work's being led by Amara Rolston, who we had hoped would join us today, but has not been able to. And on the left-hand side, some ongoing work with the city as follow-up to the resilience strategy to pilot test a connected community approach to resilience building in a number of neighborhoods. And that work is currently paused because of COVID, but we're very hopeful that we can get that underway. And Ismail, please
Yes,
tell us
thank
about
you,
your
Blake.
work.
Yes, I would like to sum up basically what I'll tell you based on theory, research, and community practice. I'm coming from the neighborhood of Regent Park. As many of you know, Regent Park is going through a mass revitalization. $1 billion investments have been put into the neighborhood in order to revitalize it. And in the beginning, it was clear to everybody involved that if you want to revive a community, it's not just about physical development, it's also about social development. So in the beginning of this 20-year revitalization, there was already a recognition that this was a two-way street. So $1 billion investment came to the neighborhood. The physical infrastructure of the neighborhood has been changed. State-of-the-art facilities and buildings have been built. But my work connected with social development side. And at the time, I was a community volunteer. I've lived in the neighborhood for 15 years, and I was excited about the new change. However, at the time, I wanted to understand how to better leverage these investments. And I came across the Center for Connected Community. If you can look at the colorful picture of people side by side, that is the sort of the theory of change that's at the Center for Connected Community. It's all about people with similar values, people who are, some who are subject matter experts, some with lived experience, some who are city, and some who are on the ground community member, all of them sitting at the table together to problem solve together. And at the time, the neighborhood was connected to what's called the Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy. That was a strategy by the city to activate people, to activate resources, and to activate neighborhood-friendly policy. So at the time when I came across both this theory of practice on how to build community, and we had this neighborhood infrastructure called the Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy, I began to work in the neighborhood through both lens. Next slide. So if you look at the next slide, this is the physical infrastructure we've built. It's made out of, the squares are each working groups. So if you can imagine, the red square is the safety network. Who sits at the safety network? Police officers, principals of the school, grassroots leaders who are interested in safety issues, Toronto Community Housing Safety group. So anybody, whether you're an organization, whether you're city staff, whether you're a grassroots leader, you sit at that table together to think about how safety in the neighborhood needs to be implemented. And if you look at the blue, that's community building. The idea there is that Toronto Community Housing, service agencies, and grassroots leaders sit there together, and their goal there is to bring together social cohesion and social inclusion, because as you know, the community is built out of 100, used to be built out of 100 Toronto Community Housing resident. New market residents are coming in, so there's not enough cohesion. There will be infighting, there will be conflict. The job of that working group is to build groups and activities and spaces that bring people together. So basically, we've created this infrastructure to make sure that social development happens in the neighborhood. Now, all of this was pre-COVID. This is the work that through the strategy we were building at the local level. And at the heart of all of this working groups is a planning committee that meets weekly. And again, this is a group of people that are both with lived experience and subject matter expertise, all trying to coordinate and align the different pieces. Next slide. This is the planning committee I was talking about. You need a core group like this because if you're working with an infrastructure as different working groups, you need coordination, you need alignment, and you need to make sure that both residents and other stakeholders are engaged. What typically happens is that there's a power imbalance. Those who are subject matter experts think that they know better, and they will speak in a language that's very difficult for people. So what you'll get is residents slowly leave the tables because of the imbalance. So this committee's job is to make sure that there's enough engagement by both parties. And you don't want only a residents only table, because what will happen is all the major important decisions will be made elsewhere, right? And this residents are invited in after everything has been designed, after everything has been implemented, as a token just to provide input and feedback. They're invited at a later stage. So we have to create this balance of both the experts and the experience. And this is the work of that committee that meets weekly. Next slide. So if you can look at what happened to us on COVID, if you look at the picture before, those are residents, organizations, PCSC staff, they are city division directors and managers. And what happened was COVID hit, we transitioned to Zoom and we continued our work. And the leadership here was a resident. It was myself, basically, because I was a local champion. I wanted to make sure that the excuse of we're responding to emergency did not mean we were leaving residents, because I knew if we were not in charge of the meetings, we would be left behind. So what I did was I just bought a Zoom link using my own money and just sent an email to everybody telling them, hey, tomorrow next week's planning committee is happening and come on board. Because what would have happened was, and it did happen, my intuition was right, the city had set up a cluster table and they left the TSN 2020 tables to respond to COVID, the emergency, and they created a new structure called the cluster tables. And the cluster tables are only city staff and organizations. There are no grassroots leaders there. I knew this would happen if we did not retain the table's collaborative nature, because it was built on collaboration. So what I did was I convened the meeting, and luckily, with the exception of the city, everyone, organizations were continued to be present at the table. And this was key because of the relationships we've built with organizations. They were taking on this different mindset, the mindset of a community development, not just service delivery, where residents were seen as collaborators, people who had good information to provide in order to execute anything. So luckily, because we've had those relationships, the organizations did not leave our table. They were there with us and are still with us in terms of responding to community challenges. Next slide. So this is what we did together. Community. If you look at the yellow, that's the communications table. What they did was they responded to. They made sure through WhatsApp, through our websites called Regent Park Social. They made sure that COVID safety protocols and information was shared across the community through residents. Resident leaders like Shakhlo were responding to COVID, and they needed information that provided safety protocols. So all these channels already existed, and we made use of them. The safety network, they did a neighborhood safety town hall, talking about the COVID situation. And then we learned from Parkdale, which created the neighborhood pods. So we also implemented 3 neighborhood pods, and we set it up in the community with the help of Toronto Community Housing staff and organizations and residents, especially Toronto Community Housing staff, because we leveraged their networks by calling individual residents, asking them elders, asking them what their needs are, connecting them to a neighbor-to-neighbor pods. All this was done through a coordination of the safety network. Community building, the blue table, what they did was they created community gatherings online through Zoom and what's called neighborhood games, so that cohesion and entertainment, even though we're in COVID, it does not mean we cannot have fun. And through that channel, we did that. The employment table, because of the challenges, they switched gears and made sure that the neighborhood employment strategy was adapted, so that the impact of employment on the neighborhood was being recorded. and they were adapting their their work. Next slide. Of course, this did not mean all the work we did was collaborative. Every person who was good at what they were good at were executing their work. Grassroots leaders like Shakhlo are many of them. They are in every neighborhood. They do work that's not recorded, and all of them were executing their work. So you can see some of the flyers here. Some are collaborative. Some were done by each expert area. So the work of the neighborhood continued at different levels. Next slide. Yeah.
Thank you, Ismail. That's fantastic. I just love hearing about this stuff. It's so important. I just wanted to say that we're in the early stages of analysis of our interviews, but everything that we're being told at this preliminary level of analysis supports what we've heard from Ismail and Shakhlo, which is that, the pandemic and responses to it have exacerbated inequities, and that agencies have pulled up stakes and closed up operations sometimes very quickly without much consultation, and leaving already stretched communities to fill the gap. And that many issues have surfaced, especially around food security, internet access, of course, in a time where we're all relying on that more and more, precarity of income, and CERB relief, and issues of communication, and that communities have responded with extensive mutual aid and collaboration and initiatives, citizen-led initiatives like the examples we've heard today. But they're often doing this against great odds. They're having to fundraise amongst themselves without support from the city or agencies often. And we're seeing all these new innovations pop up, like the mutual aid network and the neighborhood pods and the bike brigade for distributing things by bicycle around the city. But we're seeing a lack of adequate support, financial and otherwise, for citizen-led responses. So this is a remarkable community response, and it's totally unsustainable in a longer term without proper support. And it's so vital that the city and agencies and residents work together to support resident efforts and resident-led initiatives like this.
So the example here is, the idea here is, in terms of the connected community approach, and in terms of the different stakeholders playing different roles. Each of us have the expertise in some area. And the idea for me has always been, how do you leverage each other's work, right? At the time, if you're looking at this slide, this was in terms of the city has ample expertise and resources, and communities have ample experience and connectedness to the individual people we are serving. So how do we collaboratively bring together? It's not that one takes the other's work. It's that we come together on the ground to amplify the work that we do. And in many ways, when I think before, my struggle has always been, how do you bring someone as big as the city to the table? And to me, with this work with Blake, I've even realized, how do we bring knowledge through the universities to communities and make sure that experiences that are happening on the ground are heard by this sector of knowledge, research that's happening across the universities? Yeah, next slide.
So we have a few takeaways, and I think, Anne, you were going to start with the first few.
I think, one of the key takeaways from this work for us is that many initiatives that are extremely well designed at a systems level fail to take into account that a community is a ecosystem, and that it is a dynamic interplay of people, organizations, and institutions that can either make or break a larger project in that as Shakhlo and Ismail both said, is that the people on the ground are the people with the connections and the locally based knowledge. And grassroots groups, particularly, grassroots groups are those who groups that are resident-led, that they are predominantly unfunded, and they are purely driven by the residents themselves, not on behalf of an organization. One of the things that I find in my work quite often is that people say, oh yeah, we're working with the grassroots, we're working with the United Way. And, you know, not to say that the United Way doesn't do great work, but they're not on the ground, they're not residents, they're not at the grassroots, and can't do that nuanced, context-specific work that's required in community.
Thanks, Anne. We're gonna power, I think, pretty quickly through the rest of these because I think we're coming up closer to the hour and we wanted to have a chance to field some questions. So just to underscore what we've said already, that community resilience really needs to include a bounce forward component to re-engineer our systems, in particular, broader systems like the city, and formal institutions to be more responsive to community. And this is a component that C3 is particularly good at and keen on, and that we're building into the work we're doing with the city, and really making equity a core component. And that community-centered resilience is not about positioning community as service recipients, or alternatively, community being left to their own devices to figure everything out and fill all the gaps, but rather to look at how grassroots groups and formal institutions and organizations work better together to co-create community resilience.
Yeah,
and on the research front, really connecting university and community so that we can center community in knowledge production and co-production. Like we've been fortunate to be able to do with C3 in this project. And in fact, I hope demonstrate in this presentation the value and importance of community voices also in knowledge translation. And I think the last point, Ismail, is one you were going to make.
Yes, and lastly, what do you call, when you bring together theory, research, and lived experience, then the results are impactful. And I've been really grateful to have connected with the connected community approach, the theory, and through Blake, the research, and through Shakhlo and myself, bringing experience to this part. Thank you, everyone.
So I'm sorry we've gone a little longer than we thought, but we thought it was so important to include community experience and voices. So thank you for bearing with us. Oh
no, I think we're all delighted, and it could go on another hour. I think there's enough interest in the audience. So thank you, Blake and Anne and Shakhlo and Ismail. We started a little bit late, so we'd like to take 5 or 10 minutes for a few questions if the speakers have time. And you can either raise your hand or pop your question in the chat. I'm not a co-host, but I think the School of Cities staff will ask you to turn your microphones on if you can't. Does anybody have any questions for Blake and Christian?
Hello, panel. Yeah, it's nice to hear from you guys. I guess my question has to do with sense making. I noticed that you talked about the sense making workshops to get people informed about the complexity of the situation. So my dilemma here is that I think the problem is that people are not getting the right information that is needed to be informed of the solutions. And even if they are, they might be like totally reactive and they might want to derail this. So how are we planning on getting people that are more, let's say, business oriented as opposed to community oriented? How do we get those people and talk to those people? How do we get to talk to people with views that are not necessarily seen in local, provincial, federal media? because there is a problem that people don't have this access to the same information.
So I just want to be clear what we mean by sense making when I put it up there, and then I can turn it over to Ismail or Anne to respond to your other part of your question about business and other stakeholders. When we talked about sense making as part of our research, we're really talking about bringing our preliminary analysis from the interview. So in other words, the ways in which we've started to digest what we've been told by the community back to them for their input and their co-creation of knowledge with us in a collaborative sense-making endeavor. So in a sense, this is the way in which we're involving them in the analysis, in the data analysis project itself as part of this university community knowledge co-production process. So that's what we meant by sense making there. It wasn't to bring information to the community or try and educate people. It was really to engage grassroots leaders who are, as you heard today from Shakhlo and Ismail, so well positioned in the communities and so knowledgeable about what's going on to help us understand and bring the message forward in the best possible way that reflects their experience.
I can jump in here on the how do you bring people in, and I think that's, you know, often that is kind of the approach of, you know, as Blake said, educate people. The connected community approach, it comes from the people themselves. So in the community, somebody like Ismail or my team at the storefront will talk to people in the community, businesses, institutions, residents. What is it that you are trying to do in your community and how can we help? So the idea is coordinating from the place that people are rather than structuring a project, which is the normal way of doing it, of designing something and then trying to bring people to the thing you're designing. The idea is we use a perspective empathy approach. What is it that you care about? What are you trying to do? Obviously, if there's vast values misalignment, you know, around hate and exclusion, then that becomes a whole other thing. But the vast majority of people in a community want to do something, and it's finding out what they want to do and how to make that more effective.
Yeah, and people are always looking for working models, and I think that's why research, the idea of research is important, and the place of universities, and for me, when I came across the connected community approach as an approach that was built through Storefront, that's a local community experience of what it takes to do work together. It held true for that community, and then a whole theory was developed through there, and the connected community approach was outlined. Now, for me, someone who's at Regent Park, and I read the literature in terms of what's the how do you best do community work, and I read through the literature. I came across the connected community, and what you do is here you build it through relationships. I think one of the principles was inside out. You cannot push through the agenda that someone else is not interested in. That's why through relationships, through conversations, through shared values, then you can build project by project together. And then hopefully through the work like Blake and the universities, that could be shown in the literature, that evidence-based can be shown, and then little by little, if it proves itself in community as a working model, people will take it. And if it's not a working model, people will leave it.
Were there other questions? I have a question, so I'm going to take the host prerogative and ask a question of Shakhlo. Shakhlo, I think we could see really clearly through such a strong example as the COVID response work that you described, how community resilience is enhanced by grassroots organizations because they can respond quickly and because they can use informal networks, you know, whether through social media or through donor communities. People will often give through these informal networks where they are less trustful of a more structured hierarchical organization. So, you know, there's a lot of strength there, but how do we convince more structured organizations like the city to have those resources on hand for you? And what form could they take? So what's needed? Is it money? Is it time? Is it, you know, if you could have a basket of resources available to help you respond in the moment, what would that basket hold?
Yes, yes, we will need those resources. If I would have them, of course, I would expand my project, not 1 month, but do it 2-3 months. First of all, we needed space. You know, all community kitchens were closed, and we cooked in our homes. I personally was cooking for 50-60 people. Can you imagine? In my small kitchen, and like we live extended family, 2-3 generations, and we have balcony renovations. So I didn't have access to my balcony even. Doors were locked. So I was looking for kitchen space in our community. They all were closed, and even some organizations, I said, you have a kitchen, can you give me your key? So we just go. And we needed, of course, storage space. So my living room was full of containers and all those grocery products we were spending for cooking, right? And I had many people who wanted to donate unperishable food, but again, I didn't have space. And I asked like community organizations to give us some space, maybe in library, maybe in community space. At least give us some small room. We can bring those rice and unperishable stuff. So we can also, because we didn't have those spaces, I said, people, sorry, I can give you the name of the recipient. You just go and deliver it directly, but not through me because I don't have a space to store it. And of course, yes, finances. I am pretty sure I was successful because it was Ramadan month and people just want to donate. That's why I was successful. I'm pretty sure if it would be not Ramadan month, I'm very, very doubtful that I can raise, you know, $500 or $600 money during like regular months, because it was like holy months and it just was for people who wanted to donate. I was succeeded, but otherwise, no, of course. And every time, yes, I ask, still I'm asking, if you have space, give us for cooking, space for storage for unperishable food, and yes, financial. And you know, one of the signs of that our project needed on that time was sending flyers. I shared flyer only in one group, which we had like maybe 60 or 70 families. And I thought it's enough if someone will give me 3 contacts, another one like 2 contacts, and we will get those 100 people. But you know, like in 1 hour, it was spread so widely that I started getting calls from Brampton, from Mississauga, from somewhere else. I said, you know, like it's in flyer, we're saying this is for only Thorncliffe and Flemington. Can you please help us? And even case workers from social services, they started calling and saying, can we give your flyer to our clients? And you know, we refused many people because we didn't have that capacity to drive far. But at least from within Toronto, volunteers said we can drive within Toronto, it's okay. But this was a sign of that people knew that more people needed it, and they just started sharing. So after 1 week, I just said, people, please stop, not share. We have so many requests, and I feel so sorry to say no, so just stop sharing. So this is what our situation was.
Yeah, in many ways, what do you call it? The problem here is just is coordination. I think especially in my own neighborhood, it's not as if we don't have space. Everywhere you go, there's space. Everywhere you go, there's state-of-the-art facilities, kitchens. But we've built superstructures. We've built what do you call it? There's distrust to grassroots leadership, as if we're incapable of learning the different policies. What do you call? Funders, what they call, not trusting grassroots leadership to deliver what they've been delivering for the past 30 years. So it's all about what they call gathering. We all have assumptions about each other. I have bad assumptions about organizations until I sat with them and I saw day in, day out, they're working to rebuild community. But it's all about finding how to do it better. And in my sense, a person called me one time and told me, I'm connected to the federal dollars coming in. I want to bring money into the neighborhood. How do I do it? I want to be community informed. I said, connect to that grassroots leadership. They're already connected. They're already delivering. And then that grassroots leadership called me back and said, oh, we have space issues. And then I said, who has space in the neighborhood? And then I connected them to the mosque, which was doing nothing and wanted to have a project. And so I connected them. A partnership was set up, and then they delivered agility, responsiveness. But only that only happened because there was trust to begin with. And I think communities are not starting; they already have it. But it's about what they call getting rid of those old assumptions, and what they call, especially by funders. I think because through the Center for Connected Community, where facilitations of conversation between that sector and grassroots leadership is happening for the first time, and conversations are being had around how best to support on the ground. So I think supporting that work and showcasing it through research, it's one way of doing it. But the resources are all there. We are a rich country. All that we need is better ways of coordinating.
Can I just jump in here and say, absolutely, Ismail, absolutely that's, the coordination is key. There are also some fairly significant structural and systemic issues that stand in the way. The best of will from people who want to contribute to grassroots groups, the CRA regulations, the funder mechanisms that are in place, the accountability. There are some significant issues.
Liability.
And so we're working with the Local Champions Network and a bunch of different funders to try and figure out these really messy, complex structural problems that get in the way of the best of intentions to give to grassroots groups.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Dr. Poland, do you have any other words before we close this session?
I think Ismail and Shakhlo and Anne have said it so beautifully. I really have nothing much to add other than appreciation for this opportunity to share with you and to profile the work, the important work that's happening in communities, and hopefully delivering this message that really, for a fairly modest investment of time and resources, we could be doing such a better job of supporting on the ground grassroots work and doing it with a connected community lens that really privileges and centers community in resilience efforts. And what we're seeing during the pandemic just reinforces that message and the power of community all at the same time. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again for joining us. And just before I close the meeting, I'll remind everybody that we have a speaker next week. It's Dr. Tara Penny from the Department of Psychology at York University, who will be speaking on sustainable and equitable global food systems and the global food supply. So I invite you all to join us then. Thank you again.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Shakhlo and Ismail. Fantastic, and Anne as well.